Hi, this is Beth Renfrow, and this week my Newbery award-winning book is The Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I think it's a really cool picture. It's just a Getty images photo of an elevator. Obviously, that's where we're going to be taken on this journey throughout the book. This is the first book, honestly, that I've ever read that's written in verse. It's a fiction, but written in verse, and so it tells this whole beautiful story with very, very few words, and I find that extremely interesting. As you can see, like on the pages, it's just little tiny short. They don't necessarily rhyme, and it goes in story order. Definitely, you are inside of our main character, Will. You are inside of his head, and this is exactly what he's thinking, or as he encounters people, their conversations back and forth. Just kind of some grayscale behind it, but even it was so powerful. This is the first statement that really caught my heart. Another thing about the rules, they were meant to be broken. They were meant for the broken to follow. So this is the story of Will, who he's 15 years old, and he just witnessed his brother Sean being gunned down in the street outside of their house. This is a very strong story about the reality of urban violence and gun violence that we have going on today. And so the rules of, I guess, the hood is that there's no crying, there's no snitching, and there's must be revenge. And so the next day, he leaves his mom still asleep from crying all night, and he takes his brother Sean's gun, tucks it into his waistband, and gets on the elevator to go and find the guy that had actually shot his brother. And so as he arrives to each floor, a different person that he knows from his life that were all victims of gun violence get on the elevator. So um, first we encounter Buck. In each of these, Buck, it was actually his brother's best friend and also knew his uncle, but we get like level 6. And so each time that they stop on a new floor, a new person gets on, and they're all victims of gun violence, and so obviously they're ghosts. And so Buck gets on. He's actually the one that had given the gun to Sean, and he was murdered. And Sean, there's only 15 rounds left in the gun, and Sean had sought revenge for who had killed Buck. The next person that gets on is Danny. She's a girl she is 16, and he doesn't recognize her, but she knows him from when they were 8 on the playground, and she was struck by just a random bullet that missed who it was meant for. And so her big question to Will was, what are you going to do if you miss? His uncle gets on, his dad gets on, another flinch gets on, and they all basically are questioning what he's going to do. What is his plan? How are you going to do it? And they really sincerely question that he has the heart to be able to follow through with this rule that he's supposed to abide by. But obviously, we draw from this that these actions have consequences, and they're all interwoven in a bigger way than Will ever realized. And so his big question at the end, when his brother Sean gets on right before they get off, and I love this, is it right? He says, "Are you going to get off? Because if he gets off the elevator, he's going to end up just like all of the rest of them. He's just going to be the next level, essentially, on the floor." So my activity is for all of our students to break into groups, and then they'll each pick a character. And obviously, it doesn't have to be surrounding gun violence, but to pick a character and formulate their own story and introduce us to their character and write it in verse, and then get together and everybody tells each of our levels for our elevator to bring us down. And then obviously I would expect for all the characters and their storylines to be probably very different, since we're not doing it as one large classroom. But to then say, okay, how can we find ways that these characters might have been intertwined or interrelated, that maybe they wouldn't have expected to have been in the first place. So I think it's a really great conversation starter, conversation piece, something that we need to be able to talk about, the reality of this violence that we have in our country. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I actually very highly recommend anybody pick it up, especially if you haven't read a book in verse before. It's really, really wonderful.